The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Emily set two steaming mugs on the breakfast table. She glanced at her husband, Daniel, engrossed in his phone, his face illuminated by the cool glow of the screen. To anyone observing, they were the perfect couple. A beautiful home, stable jobs, and a seemingly unshakable bond formed over 12 years of marriage. But Emily's intuition had been nagging her for weeks now, a whisper she couldn't ignore. It was in the small things, Daniel's sudden obsession with his phone, his half-hearted laughter during their usual banter, and the lingering scent of an unfamiliar cologne on his clothes. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft yet probing, "you've been working late a lot these days. Everything okay at the office?" He looked up briefly, a flicker of something unrecognizable crossing his face before he smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just some deadlines. Nothing to worry about." Emily nodded, forcing herself to mirror his smile. But as she sipped her coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. That evening, as Emily sorted through laundry, she found a crumpled receipt in the pocket of Daniel's jacket. It was from a high-end restaurant she didn't recognize. The date matched a night he'd claimed to be stuck at work. Her stomach clenched. She tried to dismiss it. After all, he could have gone out with a client. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. In bed that night, Emily stared at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside her. Her mind raced, replaying moments she'd overlooked. The rushed goodbyes in the morning, his sudden reluctance to share details about his day, and the way he avoided her gaze when she asked simple questions. She thought back to their early days, how Daniel would surprise her with handwritten notes and impromptu dates. They had built a life together on trust and shared dreams. But now, cracks were forming in their foundation, and she didn't know why. The next day, Emily decided to confide in her best friend, Sarah. Over a cup of tea, she shared her growing suspicions. "Maybe I'm overthinking," Emily admitted, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Sarah frowned, her concern evident. "You're not the type to jump to conclusions. If something feels off, it probably is. Have you talked to him about it?" Emily shook her head. "I'm scared to. What if I'm wrong? Or worse, what if I'm right?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Emily's. "You deserve to know the truth. Just be careful, okay?" That evening, as Daniel kissed her cheek before heading out for another late night at the office, Emily felt a pang of determination. The unease had turned into a burning need for answers. She walked into his home office, her heart pounding. The neatly arranged desk held little clues until her eyes landed on his laptop. Taking a deep breath, she opened it and began searching. Emails, calendars, and recent searches. Nothing seemed unusual. But as she was about to give up, she found a folder tucked away in his documents titled Miscellaneous. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. The screen displayed a series of photos, none of her. They were of Daniel at the same restaurant from the receipt, smiling at a woman Emily had never seen before. Her world tilted. Emily closed the laptop, her chest tight with betrayal and disbelief. She sat in the quiet room, the reality of the situation sinking in. Her husband, her partner, had been lying. But why? And for how long? For the first time, Emily realized she couldn't trust the man she'd shared her life with. As the weight of the discovery bore down on her, she made a silent vow. She would find out the truth, no matter the cost. The sound of rain tapping against the window mirrored the storm inside Emily as she sat in her car, parked outside Daniel's office building. It was nearly 10 p.m., and she had called him earlier, only to hear the same rehearsed excuse. "I'm swamped, Em." "Don't wait up." The photos from his laptop haunted her. Was this woman just a colleague? A friend? Or something more? Questions spun in her mind, each one more devastating than the last. Emily clutched her phone, debating whether to call him again or to leave and try to sleep off her anxiety. But something inside her snapped. She was done waiting for explanations that wouldn't come. The next morning, Emily sat across from a man named Marcus, a seasoned private investigator with sharp eyes and an air of calm professionalism. "Mrs. Parker," he began, leaning forward, "if you're certain you want to proceed, I'll need access to anything that can help. Phone records, schedules, locations he frequents." Emily nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. It contained copies of Daniel's recent receipts, a list of his common excuses, and even the few photos she'd found. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just need to know the truth." Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. "You'll have answers soon." The days that followed were a mix of anticipation and dread. Emily buried herself in work, but every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped, hoping for updates from Marcus. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table staring at a half-eaten dinner, her phone lit up with a message. "We need to meet. I found something." Emily's pulse quickened. She grabbed her coat and drove to the cafe Marcus had specified. Marcus slid into the booth across from her, a manila envelope in hand. "This isn't easy to share," he said, his voice measured, "but I think you deserve to see it." He laid out photographs and notes, images of Daniel holding hands with the woman from the restaurant, laughing with her in a park, and entering a hotel. Emily's hands shook as she sifted through the evidence. It wasn't just a lie. It was a betrayal on every level. "Who is she?" Emily managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Her name is Rachel Miller," Marcus replied. "She works at his company, but it seems their connection is personal." Emily's stomach churned. Every shred of hope she'd clung to dissolved into anger and heartbreak. Emily wasn't sure what compelled her to seek Rachel out, but the next day, she found herself outside the office building, watching employees trickle out. When Rachel finally appeared, Emily's breath caught. The woman was younger, stylish, and exuded a confidence that made Emily feel invisible. "Rachel," Emily called out, stepping into her path. The woman turned, her expression wary. "Yes, I'm Emily Parker, Daniel's wife." Rachel's face paled, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Emily clenched her fists, her voice rising. "Don't play dumb. I've seen the pictures. I know everything." Rachel glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. "Look, I didn't mean for this to happen. Daniel said your marriage was over." The words hit Emily like a slap. Over? She felt the ground beneath her shift, but she refused to let herself crumble in front of this woman. "It's not over until I say it's over," Emily said coldly before turning and walking away, her heart pounding. At home, Emily locked herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, eyes red from crying, face etched with pain and fury. Why had Daniel lied? What had gone so wrong in their marriage that he sought comfort elsewhere? She replayed their years together, searching for the moment things had started to fall apart. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Marcus. "More updates. Call me when you're ready." Emily dialed immediately. Marcus's voice was steady as he relayed the latest information. "He's planning to meet Rachel at the hotel again tomorrow night. Do you want to confront him there?" Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of confronting Daniel, demanding answers, but now that the moment was within reach, she felt paralyzed. "I'll think about it," she whispered before hanging up. Emily called Sarah, her rock through this nightmare. "You can't keep torturing yourself, Em," Sarah said. "You have to confront him. Even if it hurts, you deserve the truth." Emily nodded, wiping her tears. "You're right. I need to face this head on, but I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Sarah said firmly. "You've always been stronger than you think." The following night, Emily stood outside the hotel, her heart racing. She had asked Marcus to accompany her, not for protection, but for moral support. As she watched Daniel walk into the lobby, hand in hand with Rachel, something inside her snapped. She no longer felt fear or heartbreak. She felt resolve. "Let's go," she said to Marcus, her voice steady. They followed Daniel to the restaurant where he and Rachel were seated, laughing over wine. Emily walked up to their table, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Enjoying yourself, Daniel?" she asked, her voice dripping with icy calm. Daniel's face turned ashen as he looked up at her. Rachel froze, her eyes wide with panic. "Emily," Daniel began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "Save it," she said. "I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime." Emily stood at the entrance of the upscale restaurant, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the room. Her pulse thrummed in her ears as she locked eyes with Daniel and Rachel, sitting at a table near the back. Their laughter was a cruel contrast to the pounding of her heart. Daniel's eyes flickered up as Emily approached, a hint of panic flashing across his face before he masked it with a weak smile. "Emily," he said softly, standing up, "what are you doing here?" The room seemed to close in around them. The silence that followed her question was thick with tension. Rachel sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes darting between the two of them as if she could vanish into the background. "I could ask you the same thing," Emily responded, her voice surprisingly calm, though her insides churned with rage. She set the manila envelope on the table, the papers and photographs inside rustling like the faintest whisper of betrayal. Daniel's eyes went wide as he glanced down at the evidence, his smile faltering. For a brief moment, Emily caught a glimpse of the man she had once known, but then it vanished, replaced by a coldness she hadn't seen before. "Emily, listen," Daniel began, his voice strained, almost pleading. But Emily couldn't hear him. Her mind was a whirl of confusion, disbelief, and hurt. This was the man she had built her life with, the father of her children, her partner in every sense of the word. Yet now he stood before her, unable to offer an explanation that could make sense of this betrayal. "I don't need to listen, Daniel," Emily said, her voice cutting through the air. "The truth is right here, in black and white." She flicked her finger over the photographs. "How long has this been going on? How many lies did you think you could tell me before I figured it out?" Rachel stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Please, Emily," she said, her voice shaky. "This isn't what you think. Daniel and I—" "Shut up," Emily spat, turning on her with a sharp glare. "You're the one who knew about our marriage and still decided to cross this line. Don't try to make excuses." Rachel flinched, stepping back, but Daniel reached out to grab Emily's arm, his grip tightening. "Emily, please. Let's talk about this somewhere else, okay? We can work through this," he said, his tone desperate now, like a man who saw everything slipping away. Emily yanked her arm away, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "Work through this," she echoed, her voice growing louder. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and now you want to talk about it?" Daniel stepped back, his face flushed. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, Rachel, and it's not what you think. Not what I think." Emily's heart felt as though it was cracking in two. "You've been having an affair, Daniel. How is that not what I think?" Daniel looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "It wasn't just about sex, Em. It's complicated. I thought I could keep everything together, that no one would get hurt." His voice trembled now, as though he had lost control of the narrative. "Complicated?" Emily repeated, her eyes burning with disbelief. "You thought you could keep everything together? What about me, Daniel? What about our family? Was that just part of the lie, too?" Her voice cracked as she spoke the words, the realization of the depth of his betrayal hitting her like a tidal wave. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that had been built on falsehoods. The trust, the shared history, the love she thought they had. Was it all a lie? Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His silence spoke volumes. "Was this all a game to you?" Emily's voice wavered between anger and sorrow. "To juggle your family and your other life without anyone noticing? Without any consequences?" Rachel, standing by the table, finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Please, Emily, I never wanted to hurt you. Daniel told me you two were separated. That you—" "He told you what?" Emily shouted, cutting her off. She turned to Daniel, her voice low but filled with rage. "You told her we were separated? You told her that we were done?" Daniel's eyes flickered with guilt, and for a moment, Emily saw the faintest glimmer of regret, but it was too late. Too much damage had been done. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for you to find out like this." "But you did," Emily replied, her voice steady now, almost cold. "You chose this, Daniel. You made the decision, and now I have to deal with the consequences of your choices." She took a deep breath, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. She couldn't let him see her break down. "Not here, not in front of him. I've been living in the dark for so long," she said, her eyes locking with Daniel's. "And now I see everything so clearly. But the truth is, I don't know who you are anymore. You're not the man I married. You're someone else, someone I don't even recognize. Daniel reached for her again, but she stepped back, her hands shaking. Don't touch me. For a long moment, Emily stood there, her chest rising and falling as she absorbed the full weight of the situation. She could feel the room closing in around her, the reality of what had just happened sinking into her bones. Maybe I don't need to know any more of your excuses, Daniel, she said quietly, her words like a verdict. Maybe it's time I take matters into my own hands. Daniel's eyes widened, the realization dawning on him. What do you mean? He asked, his voice panicked. I mean, I'm done, Emily said firmly. She turned to Rachel. And as for you, I'm sure there's no point in continuing this conversation. Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but Emily didn't wait to hear her. She was already walking away, her heart heavy but resolute. The following weeks were a blur of emotions, each day stretching into the next as Emily tried to navigate the shifting landscape of her life. After the confrontation with Daniel and Rachel, the house felt hollow, like an empty shell where memories once lived. There was no comfort in the familiar. Every corner reminded her of a past she no longer recognized. Emily found herself waking up in the middle of the night, her mind replaying the moment she had walked away from Daniel. His desperate eyes, his shaking hands, the way his voice cracked as he realized she wasn't coming back. It haunted her, but it was also a relief. She had finally taken control of her own fate. The first days after the confrontation were the hardest. She had tried to maintain normalcy, pretending for the sake of the kids, but it was impossible. The atmosphere in the house had changed. The once comforting silence between her and Daniel was replaced with a tension so thick it could suffocate anyone who entered. Emily didn't know how to talk to him anymore. Words had become meaningless, a hollow exchange of pleasantries in a home that felt more like a prison. One evening, after dinner, Emily found herself standing at the kitchen counter, absently washing dishes. The smell of the soap filled the air, but it was the silence that seemed to echo the loudest. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrubbed a plate, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, seeing Daniel's name flashing across it. For a moment, she considered not answering, but something urged her to pick it up. Maybe it was the final piece of the puzzle that would bring her the closure she needed. Emily, Daniel's voice came through the phone, strained and tired. I've been trying to reach you. Can we talk? She gripped the phone tightly, her jaw tightening. She had given him every chance to explain himself. But now, the idea of speaking to him was like opening an old wound, one that had barely begun to heal. I don't think there's anything left to talk about, Daniel, she replied, her voice steady but firm. I've made my decision. There was a long pause on the other end. Emily could hear him sigh, his frustration evident even through the phone. So that's it? You're really going to walk away from everything we had? His voice cracked on the last words, as if the weight of his actions were finally sinking in. Everything we had? Emily echoed, her voice rising. Everything you had, you mean? You destroyed it all when you chose to lie. Not just to me, but to our kids. Do you understand that? How can I look at you the same way again? She took a deep breath, feeling the heat rise in her chest. I can't. I won't. I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know what I was doing. It just happened. Emily shook her head, her eyes closing as the hurt swelled again, just under the surface. You don't get to say that anymore. You made a choice. And now, I'm making mine. She hung up before he could say another word. The finality of it felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders, but also a new kind of grief. She was alone now, truly alone, and that was something she would have to learn to live with. The days following the call were filled with a strange sense of numbness. Emily busied herself with mundane tasks, grocery shopping, picking the kids up from school, preparing dinner. But in the back of her mind, she was constantly processing the devastation of it all. What had started as a promise of love had crumbled into an ocean of lies. Her friends noticed the change in her. Jessica, her best friend since high school, was the first to reach out. We need to talk. I'm worried about you, Jessica said one afternoon as they sat in Emily's living room, sipping coffee. You've been distant. Are you okay? Emily smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. I'm surviving, Jess. But Jessica wasn't fooled. Surviving isn't living, Em. You can't just bury this. You need to deal with it. You deserve better than this. I don't even know who I am anymore, Emily admitted, her voice small. I don't recognize myself in all of this. In the lies. In the betrayal. How could I have missed it? Jessica reached across the table and took Emily's hand, giving it a firm squeeze. You didn't miss anything. You trusted him, and you gave him everything. You loved him, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now you need to love yourself enough to move forward. And you will. One step at a time. Emily wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. The pain was still raw, but Jessica's words helped. She wasn't alone in this. She had friends, family, and most importantly, herself. It was time to rebuild. Months passed, and slowly, Emily began to piece her life back together. The divorce proceedings were difficult, filled with legal battles, emotional tolls, and moments where she questioned her choices. But she kept moving forward. She started seeing a therapist to help her untangle the knot of emotions, anger, guilt, relief, confusion. With every session, she felt stronger, more equipped to face the future. One evening, while sitting at her kitchen table and sorting through paperwork, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. She opened it to find her daughter, Ella, standing there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Mom," Ella said, her voice hesitant, "I made this for you. It's because I think you're really strong, and I don't want you to be sad anymore." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she bent down to hug her daughter tightly. "Thank you, sweetie," she whispered. "You make me stronger every day." While the road ahead was still uncertain, Emily found peace in knowing she had taken control. She had chosen to walk away from the lies, from the hurt, and from the man who no longer deserved her love. There were days when the weight of it all would return, when the memories of Daniel's betrayal would flash before her. But each time, she grew a little more resolute. She was learning to embrace her own strength, to rebuild the life she wanted, not the one she had been forced into. And through it all, she realized that the greatest betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the loss of herself. But now, she had found her way back. It was the quiet mornings that Emily found most comforting now. The days of silence and tension in the house with Daniel were long gone, replaced with a peaceful stillness that she had to learn to embrace. The kids were older now, their laughter filling the rooms of the house instead of the awkward tension that had once suffocated the air. Emily had learned to live in a new rhythm, one that was all her own. But as the days went by, she also realized something profound. The truth of her strength had never truly been tested until now. She had spent so many years entwined in the narrative of her marriage, believing in its perfection, in its promises, that when those threads unraveled, it left her feeling like she had no foundation to stand on. But now, with each new decision, each small step forward, Emily was learning that her foundation was hers to build. A year had passed since the divorce, and though the wounds still stung, it wasn't raw anymore. Emily had spent months piecing herself back together, revisiting old hobbies, rediscovering her passions, and even forming new connections. The strength she had once believed was gone, consumed by betrayal, had resurfaced in ways she never expected. She found herself at a cafe one chilly afternoon, a book open in front of her, but her mind wandered. She wasn't reading the words on the page. Instead, her thoughts were with her children. They were growing up so fast, and though she had always been the one who took care of them, she had started to see how much they had given back to her. They had shown her what resilience looked like in its purest form. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her back to the present. It was a message from Jessica. "Lunch tomorrow?" Emily smiled, replying quickly, "Yes. I'll be there." The lunch with Jessica felt like another small step, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. They had met at a small bistro they both loved, a place that had seen the evolution of their friendship over the years. Jessica could always be counted on to give her the no-nonsense advice she needed. But today, she had a different look in her eyes. There was something in the air, a sense of pride. "You've changed, Em," Jessica said as they clinked glasses, their laughter ringing through the small, cozy space. I can see it in the way you carry yourself. You're you again? Emily smiled, the compliment warming her heart. I think I finally figured out what it means to take control of my own life, she replied. It's not about perfection. It's about resilience. Jessica nodded, her eyes softening. And you've got plenty of that. I'm just glad to see you happy. As they spoke about life, the conversation naturally shifted to the topic of love. Emily had been afraid to think about relationships for a long time, but now she wasn't running from the idea. She was open to it, cautiously optimistic, but not reliant on it for her happiness. I think I've learned that love isn't something you have to chase. It's something that comes when you least expect it, Emily said, her voice thoughtful. But I need to love myself first. I've realized that's the most important thing. Back at home that night, Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, looking at the reflection that had once been so unfamiliar after the betrayal. Her face, once filled with confusion and hurt, was now more defined, more at peace. She had taken back the parts of herself that had been buried in the shadow of someone else's lies. For so long, she had believed she needed Daniel to feel whole. She had thought that the love she gave him was the key to her happiness. But the truth was that it was her own love, her own strength, that had sustained her through the darkest moments. She had spent too many years defining herself by someone else's actions, but now she was carving out her own path. She ran her fingers along her collarbone, smiling softly at the woman she had become. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered to herself, the words echoing in the silence of the room. The journey wasn't easy. It was messy, full of tears and anger, moments of self-doubt and confusion. But as Emily stood at this point of her life, she saw the beauty in the chaos. She had learned something invaluable in the process, that the greatest love she could ever give was to herself. In those quiet moments, when she allowed herself to reflect on the lessons of the past year, Emily understood how far she had come. The betrayal no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman who had been lied to. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger and wiser, more in tune with her own needs and desires. And as she watched her children grow, she knew that they too had learned from her how to stand tall even when life throws the most unexpected challenges their way. Emily was teaching them not only how to love, but how to live with purpose. The final chapter of her journey wasn't marked by one dramatic, life-altering moment. It was marked by 1,000 little decisions, choosing to wake up each day with a renewed sense of self, letting go of the weight of the past, and finding joy in the small things. Emily had learned that resolution wasn't about ending the pain, it was about learning to live with it, to transform it into something beautiful. As the sun set on another day, Emily looked out her window at the soft orange hues staining the sky. The future was still a mystery, but she no longer felt afraid of it. She had learned that her strength was not defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had the courage to reclaim. Her life was hers to create, and she was no longer waiting for anyone's permission to live it.